Hey, good morning, Biology 2 students. After this, there will be just one more lesson. This is your second in the ecology unit for Mrs. Dickerson and Mr. Olive. Just a quick review. Some of the things that were covered on the first lesson. The term biosphere, which is just everything from the crust to the bottom of the ocean to the very limit in the atmosphere where life can be sustained. So that's what's referred to as the biosphere. A biome would be a region that contains ecosystems like a desert, a temperate rainforest, or again, intertidal zone. An ecosystem is just going to be an area that contains communities. It also includes the abiotic and the biotic parts of an area. So, like everything from rocks and air to grass and algae to squirrels. A community, that's just going to be different species, different populations living in an ecosystem, and a population is just going to be one particular organism. So, how many flies there are, yeah, on a cow pie, that would be a population of flies. And an organism just would be an individual critter or plant. Other terms from last time, niche. That's going to be the role that an organism plays. Kind of like that cleaner wrasse in that picture right there that's cleaning those fish. Competition, different species competing for the same thing, something like sunlight maybe, or access to food. A predator, something that eats prey. Mimicry, that's an animal that or a plant that tries to look like something for protective purposes or competition purposes. Parasitism, it's a win-loss relationship. So when a flea bites a dog, it gets nutrients. The dog loses nutrients. Mutualism is a win-win. So, like for example, in the first slide I showed you, when the carp was cleaning the hippo benefits, it gets cleaned up, and the carp benefits, it gets food. Commensalism is a win-blah relationship. So one animal gets a benefit, the other animal really is indifferent. And then the term biodiversity, we look at an ecosystem. We count the number of different species that can live in that ecosystem. That's biodiversity. This unit, this lesson is mostly going to focus on energy flow from trophic level to trophic level. And a trophic level is just going to, well, we'll talk about trophic levels. We'll see what those mean. The lowest trophic level in a food web, we call those the primary producers. So that's going to be the first access to the energy. In the case of these pictures, the dug firs, the grass, depending on the grassland, that's going to be taking the energy from the sun. In the case of this hydrothermal vent, that's going to be the Earth's energy, heat, coming up out of the center of the Earth and at the bottom of the ocean. So the animals that first access that energy or excuse me, the plants usually typically are primary producers. The primary producers in a hydrothermal vent are going to be bacteria called chemiotrophs that can actually eat the chemicals that are coming up out of that hydrothermal vent. Okay, then what eats the primary producers? Those are called primary consumers. So grazers, typically antelope, gazelle, bison, like in that picture, the little porcupine eating plants. Those are primary consumers. The first thing that eats the primary producers. So those are usually very big in number. And then after your primary consumers, you've got secondary consumers in different levels of secondary consumers. So you might have a frog that can eat little invertebrates in a pond, but there's also a secondary consumer that can eat it, like a garter snake. So secondary consumers interact in different ways. Vital parts of every food web would be the bacteria that break down organic matter, the decomposers that help get that process started. So decomposers, fungi that break down organic matter, they're all big parts of every food web. The largest population of organisms in any food web need to be the primary producers. So the reason they've got a lot of mouths to feed. In the case of the hydrothermal vent that you see right there in the middle, bacteria are your primary producers, and they can't really be seen by the submersibles that we send down there, but the things that eat those and thrive on those bacteria are very numerous. So we know that those bacteria, there's just a lot of biomass of bacteria down by those. Obviously, you see a forest of Doug fir there on your lower left, and that's just a huge number of primary producers in order to sustain an ecosystem. The grass, lots of grass. Primary producers are big because they provide all of the initial energy to a community. So they're the ones that harvest it, usually from the sun up here on the surface. The planet's surface, they're taking energy from the sun, and then that goes straight to your primary consumers. Interesting thing about these different trophic levels, only 10% of the energy gets passed on to the next level. So those kangaroo that are out there grazing benefit from only 10% of the calories that are provided to them by the grass. The rest of the energy becomes different parts of the cycle in different ways. Primary consumers only pass on 10% of their energy to secondary consumers. So you see those little moles and that shrew on the right there. They are eating bugs. They're insectivores. That makes them primary consumer or secondary consumers, and the owls or coyotes that eat them only get 10% of their energy that they can pass on. So it really shows why these, if you were just to look at a food chain, not a food web, but just a part of a food web called a food chain, they're very short. The energy doesn't, it gets lost a lot. So this explains why there's so few top predators and so many primary consumers. Okay, if you're going to look at a hydrothermal vent, which I think is one of the most interesting food webs, you look at the bacteria that live off of that sulfur dioxide that's coming out of that hydrothermal vent. It's superheated water, and all around it is basically death. But just right next to the vent, bacteria, big mats of bacteria can live, and then you've got the fastest growing invertebrates in the world right next to it. You've got these tube worms that are kind of interesting. They have a symbiotic relationship with the bacteria, and they're able to benefit from the energy that the bacteria provides. But if you go to the other side of the world, you're going to see a different kind of food web by a hydrothermal vent. You might see the bacteria is always the primary producer, but maybe shrimp are the primary consumers, or some type of mollusk like a mussel, a clam, is the primary consumer. So they've all evolved differently. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a few questions and see if you can answer them, and then that'll wrap up the lesson. So the first question is, what is your name and when do you have Bio 2? So answer that, and away we go. All right, here is your next question. In the Willamette Valley, the Pacific tree frog and the banana slug are both consumed by the common garter snake. Okay, that's not a question, that's a statement, but here's your question. What is a garter snake's population going to be compared to a slug's or frogs in our area? So I left the apostrophe S off. I kind of goofed when I was making this slide, but you get the gist. What is a garter snake's population going to be compared to a slug's or frogs in our area? And why? How come it would be different, if it's going to be different at all? Okay. Your next question, flies, bacteria, turkey vultures, seagulls, crows, crab, all vital in their importance to the food web that they are part of. What term would you use to describe their niche? There's a term that we use to describe their niche. What is that term? Next question. This is a math problem. It talks about kilocalories, which is a measurement. We measure food energy available to us in calories. An apple's about 70 calories. So we're going to talk about kilocalories too, right? So that's going to be 1,000 calories. So think about this for a minute. If a deer were to eat 1,000 kilocalories of grass or leaves, it might eliminate 350 of those kilocalories in urine and dung. And then it's going to burn 450 of those kilocalories trying to stay warm. It's a mammal, so it has to, it's an endotherm. So here's my question. How much does that leave for the cougar that finally catches it? Okay. You got to take that initial 1,000 kilocalories and look at what it does with them. What's left for the cougar? Okay, this next question is a little bit complicated. You got to think about it. Explain why there need to be about 1,000 gazelle or zebra or wildebeest for every lion on the African savanna. Why do you have to have that ratio? Explain why there need to be about 1,000 gazelle, zebra, or wildebeest for every lion in the African savanna. Here's a good ecology question. Sometimes humans will attempt to eliminate third-level consumers. The example I'm looking at here is a coyote. People will try to kill coyotes because occasionally they lose their lambs to coyotes. Okay. How would eliminating a third-level consumer like this coyote impact other trophic levels in a food web? You wipe out the coyotes. What's going to happen in a food web? Sometimes we do this. We wipe out an organism. We hunt it to extinction, and sometimes that creates a new issue. Okay, the primary producers in this food web are very unique. What makes them different? This is a black smoker, hydrothermal vent down at the bottom of the ocean. These weren't discovered for a long time. They were looking at deep, deep canyons off the Galapagos Islands, and places that should be very close to freezing were extremely hot. So they sent submersibles down in the 80s and investigated them, and they found life. And they found these huge, huge hydrothermal vents that were spewing out these chemicals. Anyway, the primary producers in this food web are very unique. What makes them unique? I'm going to go back through those questions again real quick, see if I have time. You guys, if you have Miss Dickerson, she's got a way that she likes you to submit questions. With me, you can just type yours up on a Google Doc or a sheet and just share it with me. That works fine. I've got fewer classes than she does to grade. All right, so here's your first question. In the Willamette Valley, the Pacific tree frog and banana slug are both consumed by a common garter snake. What is the garter snake's population going to be compared to slug or frogs in our area? Okay, next question. Crabs, flies, turkeys, turkey vultures, seagulls, crows, that dung beetle over there, all have an importance in a food web. What is the term that we use to describe their importance? Same would go for fungi, those weird shaped fungi that you see on tree trunks that are down or dead. Next question is a math question. If a deer eats 1,000 kilocalories of grass and leaves, it's going to eliminate 350 kilocalories in urine and dung. It'll burn 450 trying to stay warm. So how many kilocalories does that leave for the cougar that finally gets him? Explain why there need to be 1,000 gazelle, zebra, or wildebeest for every lion in the African savanna. How would eliminating a third level consumer impact other trophic levels in the food web? What is so unique